Welcome back to Meet at the Well. I'm Mariana, and this is a space for people living in the hard middle, too secular for the sacred, too sacred for the secular. Here we practice slow conversations rooted in dignity across differences, truth told tenderly, curiosity instead of control, and stories as sacred ground. Today's conversation sits right at that intersection. Because for many of us, especially those raised in faith spaces, there were entire categories we were taught to avoid, dismissed as shallow, inappropriate, or spiritually empty. But what if we've been missing something? What if some of the most honest reflections of longing, identity, power, and pain are happening in the very places we've been taught not to look? I'm sitting with Mara Eller, writer, editor, teacher, and literary voice, whose work invites us to read culture differently. Through her close readings of artists like Bad Bunny, she's helping people see pop music not just as entertainment, but as protest, cultural witness, and poetry. Mara, I am so glad you're here. Welcome to Meet at the Well.
Thank you so much for having me.
So tell us a little bit more about your story, Mara, what you do. We'd love to get to know a little bit more.
Yeah. So I did not grow up religious. I grew up sort of agnostic, like just not on the radar, except that I did not like what I saw as very oppressive parts of religion. Mm-hmm. I went to college at Vassar College in New York, which is a liberal arts institution. So everything was acceptable there except for Christianity. Graduated. I actually majored in Latin American studies. I traveled a lot in Latin America, learned Spanish pretty well, studied abroad in Argentina, became pretty fluent at that point, and dreaming in Spanish and all of that. Graduated, went to Spain ended up being 4 months, and the summer before I went to Spain, the summer after I graduated from college, I met someone, and he happened to be a Christian. I basically fell in love and was a pretty romantic person at the time. Yeah. Spoiler, this is not my husband. A lot of good came out of it. I was kind of hoping that I could become a Christian because I knew that this guy would not date me if I wasn't. But I'm not the kind of, I knew that I couldn't make that happen. It was either going to become real to me or it wasn't.
Right.
And strange confluence of events, my college friend, definitely not a Christian, but she wanted to do the Camino de Santiago, which is an ancient Catholic pilgrimage across northern Spain. She wanted to do that not for spiritual reasons, just for adventure reasons. And I was like, well, maybe something will happen. And then basically it was not happening. But then one day I did have what I consider my Holy Spirit moment, which I've written about. It's on Substack. I was overcome with this sense of God's presence and realness and sort of my own insignificance in the face of that, and also my extreme importance at the same time. And so that was a major turning point. Started reading the New Testament paperback that this man had given me to carry with me on my back. Long story short, but eventually that December, reading C.S. Lewis, finally understood. It was reading The Problem of Pain, and he has a chapter on sin, and it was like, oh, okay, it's not some apple, this, it all made no sense to me in the literal, limited way it had been explained.
Right.
And it just, hit me as true.
Right.
And I really did not know what had happened, but I knew that something had happened.
I love the connection that you brought between literature, of course, C.S. Lewis, and his writing, and the Holy Spirit. I just find that such a God characteristic of he finds us where we are and what we love to do. And in our language.
Yeah, which I think is a very relevant point for what we'll be talking about the different ways that God can speak to us. I shared that because obviously that has been a major influence in my life. I still wanted to be myself, and but I was trying to figure out what are the non-negotiables. Mm-hmm. And I am the kind of person who does not take what is handed down at face value. I'm going to like question everything for myself. So I went to graduate school here in Tallahassee, Florida, which is how I got here. I ended up focusing on religion and literature inside an American Studies department. And I also did a graduate certificate in publishing and editing. I ended up going into teaching from there. And so I've spent the last 16 years teaching writing and literature, mostly at the high school level. And teaching literature is what has really sparked my love of literature. Before that, I mean, I always loved reading, but I didn't know how to dig into texts the way I learned to do as a teacher.
Oh, I can totally understand that. I've always said this. If you want to truly understand something, teach it. Because
Yes.
when you teach it, you think that it's just like this transactional thing, but it's actually this relationship thing. The students teach you, you're seeing things from different, like it's like a prism.
Yeah. So I taught school at a couple different Christian schools for about 16 years. The second one, I was there for 11 years. But I retired from teaching at school. I'm full-time in my own business. I was doing part-time in both for a while, but my last year in the classroom was last May. And I thought, oh, I'm really going to miss teaching. And then in October, when Taylor Swift's newest album came out,
Yeah.
people were panning it, and I thought it was really fascinating. So I dug in a little bit and was like, there's a lot more going on here than you guys are giving her credit for.
Yeah.
And that statement kind of went viral on social media and led me into an exploration of her album as literature. And then when Bad Bunny's Super Bowl performance came out, like I had not heard of him before the Super Bowl.
I'd love to start kind of exploring your lens that you shared about what drew you, of course, through Taylor Swift and learning about Bad Bunny. What were you noticing?
I heard the name Bad Bunny, and then I started seeing stuff about the Grammys. And of course, he was up for several big awards. And because of my interest in Taylor Swift recently, I'm more interested in the pop music scene than I may have been otherwise. And so I ended up watching some videos of the Grammys and saw like that he won the best album of the year, and saw his acceptance speech and thought, okay, well, he's obviously more talented and a bigger deal than I knew. And then of course, the controversy about the show. And it's funny because the exact same reason that I ended up diving so deep into Taylor Swift's newest album is the same reason that I started getting interested in Bad Bunny, which is all these people hating on them. Why? Like, I just want to understand. And I think that's when you mentioned like my posture, I think curiosity is such a core value and an important posture, I think, to cultivate.
Right.
Curiosity and generosity. Generosity being, let's give people the benefit of the doubt. Like, let's not assume that they're idiots or evil or whatever the negative thing is that we might think of to dismiss them. We don't have to end up agreeing with them, but I believe there's something of value. There's something that we can learn from every work of art and every person.
Right. Absolutely. I remember my first year in my undergrad, I heard the concept in academia, the principle of charity.
Yes.
And I immediately, I think it was 2 weeks, my husband could not stop hearing me talking about it, because I'm like, this is exactly what our culture needs.
Yeah.
How can we take the principle of charity, which is something that is extending this generosity of perception, right? And saying, I know we're both coming to this. You're bringing something, I'm bringing something, and not automatically having a negative connotation to someone's argument. And also the challenge of know what they're arguing better than them, so that way you know what you're arguing against or what you don't stand for, right? And so curiosity plays such an important role in that. And so I love that you mentioned both of those. What I would ask next is for people that might be skeptical and might even be like, Bad Bunny, I mean, that's just like the most atrocious or the most vulgar. When you say pop music can function as poetry, can you extend that a little bit more, and then what makes something poetic in your view?
Yeah. Well, if you don't mind, I'd love to hear just a little bit more from you first about what, as someone who's grown up in a Latina culture, um, how did you grow up thinking about Bad Bunny?
So I'm Cuban American, right? I didn't know English till much later in my teen years. It was English as a second language. My home, my household, everyone spoke Spanish. And I grew up with reggaeton, which is the genre, being a firm no en mi casa. Like, it was like, no, you do not bring anything of the sort. And I can
Why
equate
not?
this, well, I can equate this to the 50s because my dad was 24 years older than my mom. And so he had a very old fashioned view, came to America, went straight into the army, very patriotic. His view was like rock and roll in the 50s was like reggaeton like in the 90s, because I grew up kind of like in the 90s. And so it was like this secular, out there, underground thing that no one respectable, and especially someone that knew God, would partake in. Yet his story's filled with him partaking in rock and roll in the 50s, and getting drunk in the army. And so these stories, but again, the reason I share this is these stories were in my household. And so I'm hearing what he's saying, but I'm seeing these stories and I'm like, it doesn't make sense. And so there was something full circle about when I went to my undergrad, complete my English degree, because everything I had been taught to fear and to kind of look down on, the curiosity helped me with my own foundation of my relationship with Christ to be able to say, okay, what about it makes it sick? What about it makes it vulgar? And what are the themes that these music genres are trying to bring into this space? And so for me, it was this almost like a crisis of identity where I was really drawn to the words because they were saying things that I might have been struggling with, or I knew friends and others that were struggling with, and I couldn't bring that to the church. I couldn't bring that to my parents. It was almost like the only place that this was being discussed was in the music, and not just in reggaeton. There was hip hop for me was it was almost like my gospel. I grew up on Mariah Carey and Tupac and Lauryn Hill. They just truly would speak to the moment and what we were struggling with. And it helped me feel like I wasn't alone. So then the big crisis for me was, is Jesus in this? Is there anything redeemable in this space?
One thing I just want to make sure to touch on is that you were talking about charity, and I think same with curiosity, that like these are Christian virtues. If you look at Jesus in the Gospels, like he's always asking people questions.
Yep, that is, it is 100% curiosity.
That posture of, I wonder what I can learn here. I wonder what I could understand better. And assuming the dignity of other people and the value of other people, even if, especially if we don't agree with everything, that they still have something to offer us. So whether that's, our literal neighbor next door or the reggaeton artist on the stage, or a work of literature, they don't have to proclaim Christ in some overt way to teach us something about God.
Right.
Or just about the human condition.
Right.
So that was something I felt really passionate about as a teacher at a Christian school, is, we don't just throw it out because, they're not Christians.
I started Meet at the Well because of John 4 and how impactful that literature and that conversation was for me. It changed my life when I saw and experienced the Samaritan woman having this conversation with Jesus, and everything you just mentioned, curiosity, dignity, truth, was involved in that conversation. How do we embody that in our day-to-day, the curiosity, the dignity, the principle of charity? And I think it starts with first coming to terms with our biases that we either are born into or we build ourselves, which leads me to what I said earlier. Where faith-based people go when they're feeling oppressed, when they're feeling a longing that they don't have words for, when they're struggling with mental health that can't be prayed away, when there's a brokenness and grief that is just so suffocating that no amount of sitting in a pew or worshiping on a Sunday is going to remove. That's why these conversations matter, and why I think poetry does have a place in faith space. That's where we express ourselves. So for you, where do you find poetry, and how do you view it?
Where I want to start with that question is, what is literature? Because I see poetry as a subcategory of literature. So when I say literature, I mean a kind of writing that brings an experience to life and communicates a truth about reality. So it's not just information attempting to appeal to the senses and immerse us into an experience, and it's attempting to communicate something true, arguably true to the writer at least, about reality. So it's more than just entertainment. So that kind of distinguishes it from what has been called like pulp fiction or something, romance or murder mysteries. And so then poetry I see as the most condensed, most potent form of literature, where it's packing more meaning into fewer words. But it's essentially the same project, using the same materials, words. So it usually involves a lot of figurative language and plays on words, and sometimes rhyming and rhythm, which clearly lends itself well to music.
Right.
So for music to be poetry, or at least poetic, I think it needs to convey complex ideas. And pop music, of course, pop stands for popular. It just means music that is very popular. But the genre as a genre has come to mean music that is designed to be more like that pulp fiction, where it's pure entertainment. It's fun. It's light. It doesn't ask you to think deeply. Doesn't challenge your assumptions.
Right.
The music itself is predictable. People are a lot more willing to consider folk music as poetry. Bob Dylan, which, of course, he got pushed back for winning the Nobel Prize for Literature because, well, you can't, that literature, that's the songs, But now we'd be a lot more willing to do that for folk music than for, or opera or something, than for pop music.
Right.
But, I think the lines become blurred with some of these artists. I would argue Taylor Swift is one of them, whose lyrics have a lot of depth and complexity, even at, and not every single song, but a lot of them, even as they are also very, singable, danceable. And of course, I would put Bad Bunny in that category.
Right.
His music is particularly danceable, but that's what I discovered after watching the Super Bowl show and not understanding much. Even with like decent Spanish, it's fast and it's the Puerto Rican dialect. There's a lot of slang. So I thought, well, what is he actually singing about? And so I looked up the lyrics to the first song that he opens with, Titi me preguntó, and it was fascinating because it's so complex. So like a pop song meaning might just be like, I like lots of girls and girls like me, and it's basically every verse is kind of just a version of that.
Right.
And that's the meaning, and that's fine. But if you can kind of summarize it in a really short phrase or sentence, then that's kind of a sign that it's not that complex. Whereas in this song, my auntie asks if I have a lot of girlfriends. And then it's this commentary, as I learned, about Latin culture where aunties are asking, boys from a young age, do you have lots of girlfriends, as like a good thing, which is kind of promoting this machismo. They're not asking girls the same thing. His music video points this out really clearly. And that a girl says, well, I have 3 boyfriends. And she's like, that's terrible. Don't say that again or I'm going to spank you or something.
Right.
And then he's like, I have lots of girlfriends. But then there's this whole second half of the song where he's like, and the music does a brilliant job of like foreshadowing and then underpinning this transformation, this shift.
I love that you catch that. Yes.
Where like even the beat gets a little more like minor key or for the second chorus. And then the auntie has her little monologue where she's like, definitely paraphrasing, but she's like, what's wrong with you? Stop living in the streets, you idiot. And it's like, you just encouraged me to live this way, and now you don't want me to live this way.
That is such a good connection. Yeah.
And then the second half of the song completely changes, and it's almost this like, not exactly a ballad, but instead of like fun rap type lyrics, he's like really singing, and he has this longing and heartbreak where he's saying like
humanity.
I want to fall in love, but I can't.
Right.
And I don't trust anyone. I can't even trust myself. He's almost like lamenting this lifestyle that he finds himself in and doesn't know how to escape. That's leaving him empty and alone.
One thing that I wrote down as I was preparing for our conversation is I find it fascinating the theological weight that shows up in spaces without religious language. I really love that. And I also love that it does become an art language for those that don't have that language yet. The beat's just sick and it's just great and it makes you feel good, but it makes you feel good because you feel seen, because you've struggled with that society, those cultural norms. You had written, I think you had posted about this in one of the viral reels that you were breaking down one of his songs, and you said, from fusing dozens of musical genres to documenting the modern Puerto Rican struggle, his work is a masterclass in musical experimentation, soul searching, honesty, and cultural activism.
Yeah. I mean, that song itself is like this little microcosm of his career, as I've come to understand it, that he started out just trying to break out on the music scene and kind of doing what was expected in the genre of first trap and then reggaeton. And then with that album, Un Verano Sin Ti, which is a pretty great album. And there starts to be a lot more complexity. And then that's around that time is when he also starts to become an activist for Puerto Rico.
Right.
Where he's, he came back from his European tour in order to protest the governing decisions that were going on.
Yep.
And then he's used his songs to champion, the rights of women and other marginalized groups. And then, of course, his most recent album, which was released early 2025, Vi Tirar Más Fotos, which has been described as a love letter to Puerto Rico, very, very intentionally bringing in all of this Puerto Rican culture and music and traditions. But it opens with Nueva York, which is a slang sort of way of saying Nueva York, New York, because there's a large Puerto Rican and Latino diaspora in New York in general. But we see this with the Super Bowl performance where he's very intentionally centering not only Puerto Ricans and Puerto Rican culture, but also Latino culture more broadly. And I think something that he did so beautifully in that performance in particular is to make it really inclusive of all Latinos. He also had Lady Gaga. Yeah. He really brought in all of the Americas in a pretty amazing way. Right. And just focused on joy as its own act of resistance, where he could have been a lot more political.
He's bringing in awareness and he's celebrating his culture. And I think that...
And with also not going too militant or combative, right. He has shown that he's not unwilling to ruffle some feathers.
Right.
But I think it was really impressive, much needed, very noteworthy that he didn't do that when he had the biggest stage there is.
Yeah. And this is where I was interested in having a discussion at Meet at the Well, because there was a lot of hatred coming from the Christian community because of the secularness of it. At the end of the day, I choose to see that as beauty in the secular. This is where you find the sacred in Christ. Then you believe that the Holy Spirit lives in you and that he is the living temple. There is no more of this pharisaical type of view, right? And
breaking down the boundaries between the sacred and the profane.
Bingo. And this is what we've seen, right? So a lot of times they criticize Jesus. Why are you sitting with tax collectors and prostitutes. And so this is not something that's new to us. I just think that literature has helped me articulate better what I was seeing that was being overlooked. And I think in a time that where everything is fast, everything is reactive, everything is flattened, there's not a lot of tolerance for nuance or for anything that could be at first glance confusing. You model something very different, Mara. You model slow, careful reading. So I ask you, why do you believe that that matters right now?
I think that one of the themes or threads that I see throughout the Bible, throughout my experience of God, is that he does not want us to be comfortable, which is not to say that he wants us to be in pain, but that sort of comfort, or I just want to have fun, or I just want it to be easy. Like, he does not want an easy life for us. That is not what his best is for us, even though we might wish that it were. Mm-hmm. And I think that is related to how he reveals himself to us. We have this Bible, but I mean, this is where I might ruffle some feathers. Yeah. Anyone who says, oh yeah, it's just obvious what it says, that's a huge red flag. The Bible is by far the most complex literary text I've ever encountered. It's like that's when I was teaching in a Christian school. Everything else we're reading is practice for this one.
Apocalyptic literature, Hebrew poetry, I mean,
and like
levels of it.
the tensions, the apparent contradictions,
parables.
Like who's the narrator versus who's the author versus what's being, unreliable narrators, I think are big in the Bible. I believe pretty strongly in that. And I honestly think that there's a lot of beliefs and there's a lot of bad, I might even venture to say evil that comes out of not allowing for that kind of nuance in the Bible, in the biblical text itself, which I want to be very clear is not saying that there isn't truth there or that it is not true. It's just that word true is itself a nuanced word. And that's one of the things that I think literature shows us, is that truth can be found in fiction. Fact is not the same as truth, and fact is not the opposite of fiction. It's all complicated. So going back to your actual question, I think anything that you think is simple and easy to understand either is not important or you're missing it.
Yep.
That doesn't mean, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. Like, there are biblical passages and imagery of ease with God, but that's again where language, I think, becomes complicated. Mm-hmm. There's a certain kind of ease that is maybe more akin to peace, but it doesn't mean that you're not working. I think he wants us to be working, to be struggling, to be stretching.
Do you want healing? Pick up your mat. There is an action and there's an endurance to it. And I love that you mentioned that, Mara, because I think the easy in that false comfort is being lulled. Like, I see it as being lulled to sleep.
Complacency
is. Yeah. He calls us to be active. Our faith is dead without action. And that action comes in the endurance, in the wrestling, in the being a work in progress. I love that an essay is called an attempt.
Yeah.
Because I consider my life one big essay.
Yeah.
I am an attempt. And lately I've been feeling this doubt that almost makes me want to stop attempting, because we live in such a polarized culture where your attempt can be seen as irresponsible. What would it look like for the church to engage culture in this example of close reading with dignity, principle of charity? What would that look like?
There are many churches, and then there is the church as a body of believers. I think the shift has to start with facing our fear, because I think judgment, hate, even that quickness to turn away or dismiss things, like that all comes out of fear. And that's something that was really apparent to me as a teacher when I would have parents push back against various things that I was teaching, is there's this fear that, well, if we listen to that, if we move our bodies in that way, if we entertain these ideas, even just imagining what if it were true, could there be? Even just asking those questions, it was like, that's the first step down the slippery slope to hell, basically.
Yep.
And that was glaringly obvious to me as you are being controlled by fear. And one of my favorite biblical passages is there is no fear in love. And I just always come back to that. When we're making decisions out of fear, we are not acting in love, and God is love. So, fear is a natural part of the human range of emotions. There's nothing shameful or wrong with feeling that emotion, but it becomes a real problem when we try to pretend that we're not feeling it, and when we don't address it, when we don't look at it honestly. And like you said, like, what are we afraid of? What is so evil about this? And it also comes down to a fundamental lack of trust in God.
Amen.
I remember thinking, this makes no sense. Like, if you believe God is all powerful and all loving, then you don't need to be afraid of entertaining these ideas. And if you just look at the person of Jesus, like, he's hanging out with all the quote unquote evil people that you are so afraid of.
Right.
We don't need to be afraid.
It might be that our definition of evil may not be the same as his.
Right. I mean, I don't think there is a person. I don't think any person can be, fully evil.
Right. He says it. We do not fight against flesh and blood, but against principalities. And again, it is not to say that there is no evil in the world, but I challenge myself, what do we usually call evil out of fear? And what do we kind of like let slide? And we're like, that's not that bad because we have no fear of that, right?
I was actually thinking about that earlier. You were saying that you really liked Bad Bunny's music and other hip hop artists. And you didn't quite say this, but I was wondering if you felt like either there's something actually good in that music or there's something very wrong with me.
100%.
And I think that's another huge problem with the way Christianity is often taught and lived out in a lot of our culture, is that there's this fundamental distrust of the self, that like our emotions can't be trusted, our intuition can't be trusted. God is in every one of us. We have to learn to distinguish between, more selfish, beneficial voices that can come in too, but to hear that small soft voice within us that is actually speaking truth and guiding us towards what matters. One other thing that I wanted to add is thinking about what is kind of the overarching theme of Bad Bunny's music, and what came to mind is liberation. So he has that in a political sense of the new album is pretty pro independence for Puerto Rico, but also a personal liberation of Yo Perreo Sola is one of his famous songs about
my anthem.
Right? Which is like, I can dance dirty by myself.
Yeah.
And it's a female anthem, which is just such a cool thing for a male sort of hip hop artist to have done. And so like in the Super Bowl performance, there was all the women by themselves in the front dancing, in a provocative way.
Right.
But it's like, that's the whole point, is that there were no men, because he's like, you should be able to dance however you want without being harassed.
Exactly.
Yeah. And, you can wear a skirt if you're a man, if you want to,
right,
which he did on stage. And it's like, I know a lot of Christians would probably say, well, freedom can go too far or something, but anything can go too far.
Right.
There's a lot of talk about liberation and freedom in the Bible,
Right.
Jesus is a message of freedom from sin, from oppression, from fear of death, and I think Bad Bunny's flavor of liberation is a very joyful liberation, which sometimes like liberation theology always felt very heavy. That's another like Latin culture, Latin American thing, but it was like kind of militant, whereas Bad Bunny's version is like,
still a smile on your face.
We can all be free to dance and to celebrate and to love. Yeah. And to me, that is that's very in alignment with who I see God being, as is the source of joy.
He is our source of joy, and his joy is our strength. And that is the most beautiful way of putting it. And I really thank you, Mara, for laying it that way. You know, it reminds me of Miriam in the Exodus. Aaron and his sister Miriam, they were Jubilee, like they were at the forefront. And a lot of people don't see her as a prophet or as a figure of authority. And she was right at the front with her tambourine, joyfully making music. And so I thank you for bringing that. You know, at Meet at the Well, we talk about meeting across divides, sacred and secular, insider and outsider. And for someone listening who has been taught to fear culture or dismiss it, what would you tell them in one sentence?
I would say beauty and wisdom and truth are present everywhere and can be present in anything. So do yourself a favor and don't limit yourself to seeking those things in certain containers that have been pre-approved by whatever authority structures.
Thank you. That was really beautiful. So I ask every guest this: what's a book that you return to again and again, or you would love to reread as a first time? And it could be any genre, any book.
Okay, I do love teaching Hemingway, but I think a really interesting book to consider for this conversation is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, which, you know, is a gothic horror. Is originated the horror genre. I do not like horror. I do not read or watch horror as a rule. Stranger Things is one exception, and Frankenstein is another. But it's one of those, I think, a very misunderstood book and misunderstood story. Frankenstein is actually the doctor. The quote-unquote monster is his creation. So there's a lot of theological overtones in that book. And it raises a ton of questions about technological advances and the consequences of those. And it's ultimately a really sad book, which may not make you want to read it, but it's really beautiful. And it does a lot of what we're talking about today without maybe so much of the joy. It is like the romantic era. But this creation is just, he is longing for connection and belonging and love. And it's kind of a cautionary tale of what happens when we deny that to one another or to certain groups because of how they look or how they act. And it's a very moving and disturbing portrait. It invites close reading, and I think it ties into a lot of these themes. So that is one that I would encourage listeners to read if you never have.
I love it. Well, now I'm going to go reread it. Thank you for helping us see more clearly, for reminding us that truth and longing and meaning aren't confined to one category of art, and that paying attention is in itself a form of care. For those listening, we will include links to Mara's work in the show notes. And if this conversation challenged or shifted something for you, share it with someone who's been told there's only one place to find meaning. And as always, you are welcome here. Until next time, we'll meet you at the well.